Emmerdale for Tuesday the 15th of July teases that something explosive is brewing in the shadows of the dales. The air in the village has been tense for days, and tension simmers beneath every whisper and glance. But no one could have predicted the storm that is about to erupt right in the heart of the Dingle family. Cain Dingle had always been known as a man of few words but powerful actions. Ever since the untimely death of Nate, he had not been the same. A constant storm seemed to rage behind his eyes, a mixture of grief, guilt, and helpless fury that bubbled closer to the surface with each passing day. Nate's death had carved a hole in his world, and that void only seemed to grow deeper with each breath. It began with a seemingly minor clash between Cain and Tracy. The argument started over something as trivial as Nate's belongings, but it quickly escalated. Tracy had gently suggested that they start clearing some of Nate's things, hoping it might bring some closure. But the idea of moving on felt like betrayal to Cain. His voice had risen, harsh and bitter, accusing Tracy of trying to erase Nate's memory. She responded with her own heartbreak, reminding him that everyone grieved differently. But Cain couldn't hear it. His grief twisted every word into an attack. The fight left both of them shaken. Cain stormed out, fists clenched, heart pounding. He found himself wandering aimlessly through the fields near Butler's farm, until the soft rustle of leaves and the wind brushing through the trees brought him no peace. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from Charity. "We need to talk. About Sarah." Cain reluctantly agreed to meet Charity, though his mood hadn't improved. They met outside the woolpack, the sun already beginning its descent behind the hills. Charity tried to keep her tone light, but there was a hint of tension in her words. The words sliced through Cain like a blade. His expression darkened, his eyes narrowing into slits. Charity explained how she'd found out, how Sarah had confided in her, but all Cain could hear was the sound of his world unraveling even further. His daughter, his baby girl, facing a future he couldn't control, another life teetering on the edge. Cain's voice trembled as he spoke. "You should have told me the second you knew." "I didn't want to make things worse," Charity replied, a plea in her voice. "You're already hurting." That word again. Hurting. As if it was a temporary wound, something that could be stitched shut. But Cain's pain was a raw, festering thing. He turned on Charity, his anger finding a new target. Charity tried to reason with him, but Cain had already started to unravel. He left before the conversation could escalate further, walking away into the night, his breath ragged and shallow. The next day, the Dingle homestead was unusually crowded. A family gathering had been called, though no one seemed entirely sure why. John was there, quieter than usual, his face pale and drawn. The atmosphere was heavy, words spoken in hushed tones, glances exchanged across the room. Cain sat in the corner, his foot tapping a restless rhythm against the floor. His eyes fixed on the mantelpiece, where Nate's photo stood, flanked by candles and fading flowers. His jaw clenched as memories washed over him. It was John who finally broke the silence. He stood near the photo, his hands trembling slightly. His voice cracked as he spoke. "I can't live with it anymore. I need to say something." Cain looked up slowly, his entire body tensing. "What are you talking about?" he asked, already fearing the answer. John's eyes darted around the room, seeking support, but all he found was silence. "That night, the night Nate died. I was there. I found him. But I panicked. I didn't call anyone. I moved the body. I thought I could protect the family. I thought I was doing the right thing." The room fell into stunned silence. Cain stood up slowly. "You what?" John stepped back, the weight of his guilt crashing down. "I didn't mean for it to happen this way. I thought if the police got involved, they'd blame one of us. I couldn't let that happen. Cain crossed the room in a heartbeat. He grabbed John by the collar, lifting him slightly off the ground. You left my son out there like an animal. You hid what happened. You let us think he just vanished. John struggled to breathe, his hands grasping at Cain's arms. Cain. Stop, someone shouted, possibly Chuz, or Sam, or Belle. But Cain didn't hear. His vision blurred with rage. He slammed John against the wall. The photo of Nate shook on the mantelpiece. He was my son. Cain roared. You let him die alone, and then you buried the truth. John fell to the floor, coughing and gasping. Cain paced like a caged animal, fury radiating off him in waves. You don't get to decide what's best for this family. You don't get to hide the truth. The rest of the Dingles stood frozen. Some were in tears. Others looked away. John pushed himself upright, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. But I swear, I didn't kill him. That doesn't matter now, Cain said, his voice low, cold. You destroyed what little peace we had. You took away our chance to say goodbye. Cain turned to the others. He doesn't get to walk away from this. Not after what he did. The Dingle Code had always been unspoken but sacred. Loyalty, family, truth. John had shattered that code. And Cain, driven by grief and rage, made a silent vow. John had to pay. Later that evening, the village began to buzz with whispers. Word of the confrontation had spread. Some defended Cain, saying no father should ever be put in that position. Others questioned how far he might go now. Cain had always been dangerous when pushed, but this felt different. This was personal. This was vengeance. Alone in his house, Cain stared at the fireplace. The flames flickered, casting shadows on the walls. Nate's photo stared back at him, as if demanding justice. Cain poured himself a drink, but didn't touch it. He was beyond numb. Outside, John sat on a bench near the church, his face bruised, his eyes haunted. He knew Cain wouldn't stop. He knew the truth had set something loose, something that couldn't be undone. And somewhere in the dark, plans began to form. Choices were being made. Lines were being drawn. The Dingle family had always weathered storms. But this time, the storm was coming from within. And Cain Dingle was at the heart of it. The tension within the Dingle household remained palpable, an invisible weight pressing down on every interaction. John had not left the village since his confession. Instead, he walked among the Dingles like a ghost, every step followed by accusing eyes, every breath laced with the heavy burden of shame. Cain hadn't said another word to him since the outburst, but the silence was even more terrifying than the violence. It was the calm before the reckoning. Cain's mind was a labyrinth of anger and memories, the image of Nate, his laugh, his stubbornness, his loyalty, clashing with the horrifying truth of how he had died. Alone. And found. And it was John who had stolen that last act of dignity from him. Cain could hardly bear to look at John without feeling a physical urge to lash out again. But this time, it wouldn't just be fists. Tracy, although still dealing with her own grief, tried to bring reason into the household. She approached Cain one evening as he stood outside the barn, staring into the horizon. You need to think about Kyle. Think about how he's watching all this. He's scared, Cain. We all are. Cain didn't look at her. His voice was low, as if speaking from the depths of his chest. He took my son from me, Tracy. I can't just pretend this didn't happen. But what's next, Cain? You destroy John and then what? Will that bring Nate back? Will that make the nightmares stop? Cain's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. A flicker of conflict. Yet the anger burned too hot to be extinguished by logic or compassion. Inside the house, Charity watched the fallout unfold with increasing dread. She had seen Cain at his worst, but this was a different beast entirely. The incident with Sarah weighed heavily on her too. She regretted not going to Cain sooner, but she'd acted out of fear, not malice. Now, even that seemed irrelevant. She found Sarah in the kitchen the next morning, clutching her phone with shaking hands. "Are you okay?" Charity asked gently. Sarah nodded, but her voice was barely audible. "It's everywhere. What happened with Uncle John? People are talking about it online. Cain's going to explode." Charity placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "You let me worry about Cain. You just take care of yourself." "Have you thought more about the test?" Sarah looked away. "I don't know what I want. I feel like everything's falling apart." And it was. The Dingle family, always known for their unity through storms, now found themselves unraveling. Each member taking sides, each moment a potential spark to reignite Cain's fury. One evening, Cain drove out of the village without a word. No one knew where he was going. He didn't leave a note. He didn't answer his phone. Tracy feared the worst. Charity feared what he might be planning. John remained in the village, but he was spiraling. He stopped shaving. He barely ate. The guilt gnawed at him like a sickness. He tried to explain himself to Sam, to Belle, to Chuz, but no words seemed to bridge the divide he had created. Even the Dingles who tried to stay neutral couldn't look him in the eye. When Cain returned, 2 days later, something about him was different. He didn't speak to anyone as he made his way to the house. He sat by the fireplace and stared at Nate's photo again, but this time with a strange, steely calm. Charity watched him warily. "Where have you been?" Cain answered without looking at her. "Getting ready." "For what?" He didn't reply. But she saw something in his eyes that chilled her to the bone. Determination. Finality. That night, Cain called a family meeting. Only the Dingles, those who had been closest to Nate, were invited. No outsiders. No distractions. John, surprisingly, was invited too. They gathered in the old barn, lit by lanterns and warmed by whiskey. It had the feeling of a tribunal. John sat at the far end, isolated, while Cain stood like a judge in front of them all. "You all know what he did," Cain began, gesturing toward John. "You've heard his reasons. But what matters now is what we do about it." John opened his mouth to speak, but Cain held up a hand. "Not another word. You've said enough. This is my turn." Cain walked slowly around the room. "I could go to the police. Let them deal with him. But we all know how that ends. Half-truths, missed details, and he gets to go free with a slap on the wrist." He stopped in front of Chuz. "Or we deal with it our way. The Dingle way." A murmur spread through the room. Sam looked uneasy. Belle fidgeted. But no one objected. Cain turned back to John. "You want to make things right? Then you'll listen to what I have to say." John looked up, his eyes red. "I'll do anything. Whatever it takes." Cain gave a humorless laugh. "Careful. You might regret those words." Then Cain outlined his plan. John would leave Emmerdale. Not just for a few weeks, not for a holiday. For good. He would pack what he needed, disappear without a word, and never return. No contact, no updates. If he truly wanted redemption, he would respect the wishes of the family he had betrayed. John, surprisingly, nodded. Fine. If that's what you want. If that'll give you peace, I'll go. Cain stepped closer, lowering his voice so only John could hear. It won't give me peace. But it'll stop me from putting you in the ground. The message was clear. The next morning, John was gone. No goodbye, no explanation. Just a quiet exit from the village he once called home. Cain watched from a distance as the car disappeared over the hill. The Dingles didn't celebrate. There was no relief, no closure. Just a quiet acceptance that the family had changed forever. Tracy tried to console Cain that evening, sitting beside him as he nursed a drink. Do you feel any better? He shook his head. Not really. But at least I did something. I couldn't save Nate. But I made sure someone paid. Sarah joined them later, and the three sat in silence, each carrying their own version of grief. Days turned into weeks. The village settled into a new rhythm. Charity focused on Sarah, who eventually made a decision about her pregnancy. Cain, though still haunted, began to open up slightly, helping Kyle with his schoolwork, fixing up the barn. Small steps toward healing, but always with a shadow trailing behind him. One evening, Cain stood by Nate's photo, whispering to the frame. I don't know if I did the right thing. But I couldn't let it go. Not after what he did. I hope you understand. I hope you're at peace now. Behind him, the door creaked open. Tracy stood there, watching, her expression unreadable. You're not alone in this, Cain. You never were. And for the first time in months, Cain allowed himself to believe it might be true. But the Dingles would never forget. And neither would Cain.